I never thought a diesel heater would become the most controversial item in my entire neighborhood. But here we are, standing in the middle of what could only be described as an all-out suburban war. My name is Quentin Irving, and I'm a contractor who specializes in restoration work for historic buildings across Montana. I moved into the Pleasant Meadows community in Billings about 18 months ago, drawn by the reasonable prices and what seemed like a quiet neighborhood perfect for someone who worked odd hours. The house was a decent 3-bedroom ranch with a detached garage that I immediately converted into a workshop. That garage became my sanctuary, where I could repair antique fixtures, refinish wood pieces, and prepare materials for upcoming jobs without disturbing anyone. Montana winters are no joke. We're talking about temperatures that regularly drop below zero, with wind chills that make it feel like you're living on another planet. My workshop needed heat, obviously, because epoxy doesn't cure at freezing temperatures, and my fingers tend to work better when they are not blue. I installed a diesel heater in November, one of those efficient Chinese-made units that contractors use in construction sites everywhere. The thing was rated for indoor use, vented properly through the wall, and cost me about $300. It kept my workspace at a comfortable 65 degrees even when it was -15 outside. Everything was fine until January rolled around and brought with it a woman named Brenda Vaughn. Brenda was the newly elected HOA president, a title she wore like a military rank. She was 47, had that aggressive blonde highlighted haircut that somehow screamed, "I need to speak to your manager," and drove a white Lexus SUV with vanity plates that read B. Vaughn. I first met her when she knocked on my door on a Thursday afternoon, clipboard in hand, wearing a puffy North Face jacket and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "Mr. Irving?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. "That's me," I replied, wiping wood stain off my hands with a rag. "I'm Brenda Vaughn, HOA president. I need to discuss a serious violation with you." I blinked. "A violation of what?" She consulted her clipboard like it contained evidence of a felony. "Your garage is emitting exhaust fumes. Multiple neighbors have complained about the smell of diesel fuel and emissions throughout the neighborhood." "My heater?" I asked, genuinely confused. "It's vented. The exhaust goes straight out through a proper vent pipe. It's no different than a furnace. Our HOA covenants clearly state that no resident shall operate equipment that produces excessive noise or emissions that disturb other residents," Brenda declared, tapping her pen against the clipboard for emphasis. "Excessive emissions. It's a heater. Everyone in this neighborhood has a furnace. They all produce emissions." Her face tightened. "Those are natural gas furnaces, Mr. Irving. Your diesel heater is creating an industrial smell that is affecting the quality of life for your neighbors. I've received 4 complaints in the past week alone." I doubted that seriously. My closest neighbors were Tom and Linda Chen, an elderly retired couple who'd brought me cookies when I moved in. On the other side was a rental property that had been vacant for 3 months, but arguing with Brenda seemed like a losing battle from the start. "Look, I need heat in my workshop. I work out there. What do you suggest I do? Purchase an electric heater like everyone else?" she said, as if this was the most obvious solution in the world. "Do you have any idea how expensive it would be to heat a 400-square-foot garage with electric heat in Montana winter?" "My electric bill would be astronomical." Brenda's expression didn't change. "That's not the HOA's concern. You have 72 hours to cease operation of the diesel heater or face fines of $100 per day." She handed me an official-looking letter that detailed the complaint, included a reference to Section 12.4 of the HOA covenants, regarding noxious emissions, and her signature at the bottom in aggressive blue ink. "This is ridiculous," I said, but Brenda was already walking back to her Lexus. I spent that evening reading through the entire HOA covenant document, all 47 pages of it. Section 12.4 did mention that residents couldn't operate equipment producing excessive emissions, but the language was vague enough to apply to basically anything. By that logic, someone could complain about barbecue smoke or car exhaust. The whole thing seemed designed to give the HOA maximum power to enforce whatever they wanted. I decided to fight it. The next Monday, I attended the HOA board meeting at the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly hosted yoga classes and book clubs. About 15 residents were there, along with the 5 board members. Brenda sat in the center, flanked by her Vice President Sharon, Treasurer Mike, Secretary Janet, and Member-at-Large Robert. When the floor opened for resident comments, I stood up. "I'm here about the notice I received regarding my workshop heater," I began. "I believe this is an overreach of the HOA's authority. The heater is properly installed, vented correctly, and no different than any construction heater used across the country. The diesel smell is minimal and contained." Brenda didn't even let me finish. "Mr. Irving, the board has reviewed your case and the decision stands. The heater constitutes a violation and must be removed. Based on what evidence? Has anyone actually tested the emissions, measured them against any standard?" "We have multiple neighbor complaints," Sharon chimed in, a woman in her 50s wearing too much perfume. "Can I know who complained? I'd like to speak with them directly." "That information is confidential," Brenda replied sharply, "but I assure you the complaints are legitimate." An older man in the back raised his hand. It was Tom Chen, my actual neighbor. "I live right next to Quentin. I haven't noticed any smell at all. I wasn't aware there was even a problem until I got the HOA email about this meeting." Brenda's face flushed slightly. "Mr. Chen, we appreciate your input, but other residents have been affected." "Which ones?" Tom pressed. "Because I'm the closest house to his garage." The board members exchanged glances. Finally, Brenda said, "This isn't a debate. The board has made its decision. Mr. Irving, you have until Friday to comply or fines will begin accruing." I left that meeting fuming. The whole thing stank of a power trip. Brenda had decided she didn't like something, invented complaints, and was now using the HOA to force compliance. I called a lawyer friend, Derek, who specialized in property law. "Unfortunately," Derek told me over the phone, "HOA covenants are binding contracts. If the language gives them authority to regulate emissions, they can enforce it, even if it seems arbitrary. You could fight it in court, but that would cost you thousands in legal fees for what amounts to a heater dispute. So I'm just supposed to cave, or find a creative solution," Derek suggested. "Sometimes you have to play their game smarter than they do." That conversation stuck with me. Play their game smarter. I started paying attention to what was happening around the neighborhood, particularly regarding the HOA itself. It turned out Pleasant Meadows was in the middle of a major construction project. The HOA had decided to build a new clubhouse, a fancy facility that would include a gym, pool, and event space. It was Brenda's pet project, something she'd campaigned on when running for president. The construction had started in December and was scheduled to finish by April. The site was at the far end of the neighborhood, on a 2-acre lot that had previously been a playground nobody used. The construction company, Riverside Builders, had their equipment staged on that lot. I drove past one afternoon to check it out. There were 2 excavators, a backhoe, a forklift, several cement mixers, and various other pieces of machinery. all diesel-powered, all sitting outside in the Montana winter. An idea started forming. See, construction equipment in extreme cold needs help. Diesel fuel starts to gel when temperatures drop below 15 degrees. The paraffin in the fuel crystallizes, clogging fuel filters and making engines impossible to start. That's why construction companies in cold climates use engine block heaters, keep fuel tanks full to minimize condensation, and often add anti-gel additives to the diesel. I noticed Riverside builders had block heaters plugged into a temporary power station on site. That's what was keeping those machines ready to start each morning despite the brutal cold. Without those heaters, on a night when the temperature dropped below zero, those engines would be frozen solid by morning. Friday came and I unplugged my diesel heater. I wasn't going to pay $100 daily fines over this. Instead, I bought 3 electric space heaters for the workshop, which ran constantly and sent my electric bill through the roof, but at least Brenda couldn't complain. Except she did anyway. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. Apparently, my electric usage was now excessive and placed undue strain on the neighborhood's shared electrical infrastructure. The letter strongly suggested I reconsider my energy consumption habits. I actually laughed when I read it. This woman was unbelievable. She'd forced me to switch to electric heat, and now that was a problem too. I started doing research. Montana winters in late January and early February regularly saw temperatures drop into the negative double digits. I checked the weather forecast obsessively. A cold front was coming the following week, with predicted lows of negative 12 degrees on Wednesday night. That Tuesday evening, I took a walk. Just a casual stroll through the neighborhood, nothing suspicious. My route happened to take me past the construction site. The equipment sat silent in the growing dark, orange and yellow machines dusted with snow. The temporary power station hummed quietly, providing juice to the block heaters that kept those diesel engines from freezing. Nobody was around. Construction crews left by 4 during winter, and the site was basically abandoned overnight. There were no security cameras that I could see, no fence, nothing. Just an orange plastic barrier fence that was more suggestion than barrier. I walked back home, thinking, what if those machines couldn't start? What would happen to Brenda's precious construction timeline? Riverside Builders was already behind schedule because of weather delays. If their equipment froze and they had to spend days thawing it out, repairing any damage, getting everything running again, that would set them back even further. Wednesday was brutally cold. The temperature at noon was 12 degrees, and the forecast called for it to drop fast after sunset. Negative 12 by midnight, possibly negative 15 by morning. I waited until 11 p.m. The neighborhood was dead silent, everyone sensibly inside. I dressed in dark clothes, pulled on a black beanie and walked out my back door. The cold hit like a physical force, the kind that makes your nostrils stick together when you breathe. Perfect conditions for what I had in mind. The walk to the construction site took 15 minutes. Every breath crystallized in the air. My face hurt from the cold. The site was completely dark except for a single yellow light on a pole near the power station. I approached the power station cautiously, my heart hammering. This was definitely not legal, but neither was Brenda's harassment campaign against me. Sometimes you had to take matters into your own hands. The power station was just a box with outlets and a circuit breaker. 4 heavy-duty extension cords ran from it to the various pieces of equipment, providing power to their block heaters. I looked around one more time. Nobody. Nothing. Just me and the Arctic cold. I flipped the main breaker. The hum of electricity stopped. The power station went dark. Those engine block heaters were now off, and in this temperature, the engines would start freezing within an hour. By morning, they'd be solid blocks of useless metal. I walked back home quickly, my hands shaking from adrenaline more than cold. Back inside, I made hot chocolate and tried to process what I'd just done. It was petty revenge, sure, but Brenda had pushed me to it with her absurd complaints and power-hungry enforcement. I barely slept that night. Thursday morning, I heard the commotion around 8 a.m. Trucks, shouting, general chaos from the direction of the construction site. I made coffee and waited. Around 9, I drove past on my way to a job site in downtown Billings. The construction site was full of people and vehicles. Workers stood around the equipment looking frustrated. One guy was attempting to jump-start the excavator with cables from a truck. Another was spraying de-icer into an engine compartment. Nothing was working. Those engines were frozen solid. I allowed myself a small smile as I drove past. The satisfaction lasted exactly one day. Friday afternoon, Brenda showed up at my door again, and this time she wasn't alone. She'd brought Sharon and Mike from the board, plus a Billings police officer. "Mr. Irving," the officer said, "a young guy named Patterson according to his name tag, we need to ask you some questions about an incident at the construction site." My stomach dropped. What incident? Someone tampered with the power supply to the construction equipment Wednesday night. All the machines froze and there's significant damage. We're talking to all residents. "I don't know anything about it," I said, keeping my voice steady. Brenda's eyes were ice cold. "Mr. Irving has had several run-ins with the HOA recently. He might have motivation to disrupt our construction project." "That's a serious accusation," I replied, looking directly at her. "Do you have any evidence I was involved?" Officer Patterson consulted his notepad. "Where were you Wednesday night between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m.? "Home. Asleep." "It was negative 12 degrees. Where else would I be? Can anyone verify that? I live alone, so no. But I also have no reason to sabotage construction equipment." Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but Patterson held up a hand. "We're just gathering information right now. If you think of anything that might be helpful, give me a call." He handed me a card. After they left, I felt sick. I hadn't expected police involvement. The construction company must have filed a report, probably for insurance purposes. Damage to equipment in cold weather due to power loss could run into thousands of dollars. Frozen engines could crack, fuel systems could be compromised, hydraulic lines could split. I'd made a serious mistake. Over the next week, I kept my head down. I went to work, came home, didn't attend HOA meetings. The construction site was quiet. No work was happening. I heard through neighborhood gossip that Riverside Builders was dealing with extensive repairs and had pushed the completion date back to June. Brenda, predictably, was furious. She sent out a neighborhood-wide email detailing the vandalism and promising that the perpetrator would be caught and prosecuted. She also announced that security cameras were being installed at the construction site. Too little, too late for catching me, but it made me nervous nonetheless. Then things took a turn I didn't expect. Tom Chen knocked on my door one evening in mid-February. "Quentin, you got a minute?" "Sure, come in out of the cold." We sat in my kitchen and he looked uncomfortable. "I wanted to give you a heads up about something. There's a special HOA meeting tomorrow night. Brenda's proposing a special assessment to cover the cost of the construction delays and equipment repairs." "A special assessment? How much?" $1,500 per household. I nearly choked. 1,500. Why should residents pay for vandalism? That's what I said. But Brenda's arguing that the damage occurred on HOA property during an HOA project, so it's a shared cost. She's got the votes to pass it too. Sharon and Mike will vote yes, and that's enough with her vote. This is insane. Tom nodded. There's more. Linda overheard Brenda talking to Sharon at the grocery store. She's specifically targeting you with this. Brenda thinks you're responsible for the power station, and even though there's no proof, she wants to punish the whole neighborhood to turn everyone against you. That's twisted. That's Brenda. Look, I like you, Quentin. You're a good neighbor, but people are going to be angry about this assessment, and Brenda's going to make sure they know she thinks you're responsible. He was right. The special meeting the next night was packed with angry residents. Brenda presented the proposal with charts and numbers showing the construction budget shortfall. When she opened the floor for discussion, the room erupted. "Why should we pay for someone's vandalism?" demanded a woman I recognized from 3 streets over. "Because it's our project and our responsibility," Brenda replied smoothly. "The clubhouse benefits everyone." "I didn't even vote for the clubhouse," someone else shouted. "It was approved by a majority vote last year." The arguing continued for 20 minutes. I stayed silent, trying to be invisible, but eventually Brenda's gaze found me. Of course, if anyone has information about who might have tampered with the power station, that could change things. Insurance might cover damages if we had a suspect. Every head in the room turned toward me. "Something you want to say, Brenda?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Just that you've been very vocal about opposing HOA decisions lately. You had a clear grievance about your heater. The timing is suspicious." "Suspicious isn't evidence," I replied. "And accusing me in front of everyone without proof is slander." "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm stating facts." Tom stood up. "The fact is we have no idea who did this or if it was even intentional. Maybe the power station failed on its own. Maybe someone from outside the neighborhood did it. This assessment is unfair." But the vote passed 3-2, with Robert surprisingly voting against it along with Janet. 2 weeks later, we all received bills for $1,500, due within 30 days. The neighborhood turned toxic. People who'd been friendly before now gave me cold looks. Someone spray-painted "Vandal" on my mailbox. My tires were slashed one night. Brenda had successfully turned me into a pariah, and I hadn't even been proven guilty of anything. I paid the assessment because I had no choice. The HOA had the legal authority to place a lien on my house if I didn't. But I was done playing nice. I started documenting everything. Every HOA violation, every questionable decision, every penny spent. I requested financial records under Montana's nonprofit corporation laws. HOAs in Montana are required to provide financial documentation to members who request it in writing. Brenda tried to refuse, but I cited the specific statute. She finally, reluctantly, provided 3 years of financial records. What I found was interesting. The clubhouse construction was originally budgeted at $400,000. But the current spending was already at $560,000, and it was only half finished. Where was that extra money going? I dug deeper. The construction contract with Riverside Builders was for $400,000, but there were additional expenses. Consulting fees paid to Vaughn Management Consulting totaling $40,000. Architecture fees to BV Design Services for $30,000. Both companies were registered to Brenda Vaughn. She was paying herself HOA money through shell companies. I made copies of everything and called Derek, my lawyer friend. "This is embezzlement," Derek said after reviewing the documents. "She's using her position to funnel HOA funds into her personal accounts. This is serious fraud." "What do I do with it?" "You report it to the police and to the other HOA members. She's stealing from everyone." I thought about it carefully. Brenda had made my life hell over a heater. She'd cost me thousands in increased electric bills and the special assessment. She'd turned my neighbors against me. She'd accused me of vandalism without evidence, but two wrongs didn't make a right. And exposing her corruption was actually the right thing to do, regardless of my personal grievance. I prepared a detailed report with copies of all the financial documents, highlighting the suspicious payments. I sent copies to every HOA member via certified mail and delivered another set to Officer Patterson at the police station. I'm bringing this to you because I believe Brenda Vaughn has been embezzling from the HOA, I explained to Patterson. These documents show payments to companies she owns that aren't reflected in any actual services rendered. Patterson reviewed the paperwork. This is pretty detailed. How did you come across this? I requested financial records as an HOA member. It's all legal. And you're bringing this forward because it's theft. She's stolen at least $70,000 from the neighborhood, probably more. Patterson nodded slowly. I'll pass this to our financial crimes unit. They'll investigate. The explosion in the neighborhood was immediate. Within hours of people receiving my mailing, my phone started ringing. Tom called first. Quentin, is this real? Has Brenda really been stealing from us? According to those documents, yes. I've turned it over to the police. Other calls followed. Some people were grateful. Others accused me of fabricating evidence out of revenge. But the damage to Brenda's credibility was done. An emergency HOA meeting was called for that Saturday. The community center was standing room only. Brenda sat at the board table looking pale but defiant. Tom stood up first. Brenda, can you explain these payments to Vaughn Management Consulting? What services did that company provide? Consulting services for the clubhouse project, Brenda replied, her voice tight. What specifically? Project management, oversight, coordination. But you're the HOA president. Isn't that your job already? Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sharon, her former ally, spoke up. Brenda, I was never aware of these payments. They weren't in the budget we approved. They were necessary expenses that arose during the project. You own these companies, I said, standing. You paid yourself $70,000 of HOA money without disclosing the conflict of interest. That's embezzlement. That's a lie, Brenda shouted, her composure cracking. You're just trying to destroy me because you're angry about your stupid heater. The documents don't lie. You created shell companies and paid yourself. That's fraud. The meeting devolved into chaos. Brenda attempted to maintain control, but it was hopeless. Robert moved to hold a vote of no confidence. It passed unanimously, except for Brenda's own vote. She was removed as HOA president effective immediately. 2 days later, Detective Sarah Morrison from the Billings Police Financial Crimes Unit called me. Mr. Irving, I wanted to update you on the investigation into Brenda Vaughn. We've subpoenaed her business records and bank statements. The evidence supports your complaint. We're moving forward with charges. What kind of charges? Theft by embezzlement, fraud, possibly more depending on what else we find. She's looking at felony charges. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. I hadn't wanted to destroy anyone's life. I just wanted to be left alone to heat my workshop. The investigation expanded over the following weeks. It turned out Brenda had been embezzling HOA funds for almost 2 years, not just on the clubhouse project. Fake invoices, inflated expense reports, payments to non-existent contractors. The total amount stolen exceeded $120,000. In early March, Brenda was arrested. The local news covered it. HOA president charged with embezzlement ran on Color 8 News. Her mugshot showed a woman who looked nothing like the confident, aggressive person who'd harassed me about my heater. She looked scared and small. The charges were serious. Montana law treats embezzlement over $10,000 as a felony with significant prison time. Brenda's lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to felony theft and fraud charges. The sentence was 5 years in Montana women's prison, with possibility of parole after 2 years, plus full restitution to the HOA. The neighborhood slowly recovered. The special assessment was refunded after insurance covered the construction equipment damage, and the court ordered Brenda to begin repayment. A new HOA board was elected, with Tom Chen as president. One of his first actions was to repeal the ridiculous emissions clause in the covenants. "Heat your workshop however you want," Tom told me. "We're done with petty enforcement." I plugged my diesel heater back in. It worked perfectly, keeping my workspace warm through the rest of Montana's brutal winter, but the situation with the construction site still nagged at me. I knew I was responsible for the equipment freezing, even if nobody could prove it. That guilt sat heavy. One afternoon in late March, I drove to Riverside Builder's office in Billings. I asked to speak with the owner, a man named Greg Thornton. "I'm from Pleasant Meadows," I explained. "I wanted to talk about the equipment damage in January." Greg looked tired. "That cost us 3 weeks and about $30,000 in repairs. Insurance covered some of it, but not all." "I know, and I'm here to tell you it was my fault." His eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me," I explained everything. The HOA dispute, my frustration, the decision to flip the breaker, all of it. I'm not proud of it. It was stupid and vindictive, but I'm responsible and I want to make it right. Greg stared at me for a long moment. "You realize I could call the police right now?" "I do, and maybe you should." But I wanted to own up to it and offer to pay for the damages that insurance didn't cover. "That's about $8,000. I nodded. "I can pay it in installments if needed, but I'll pay it." Greg leaned back in his chair. "That's more than most people would do." "I appreciate the honesty, even if it's a few months late. Let me think about the police aspect. But yeah, if you're serious about the money, we can work something out." We arranged a payment plan. $4,000 up front, the rest in monthly installments over a year. It would hurt financially, but it was the right thing to do. Greg never called the police. He told me later that my taking responsibility meant more than pursuing charges. The case would have been hard to prove anyway, and the restitution covered his losses. By April, things had settled into a new normal. The clubhouse construction resumed under new management, scaled back to a more reasonable design. My workshop hummed with the reliable heat of my diesel heater. The neighborhood stopped treating me like a pariah. I learned a lot from the whole experience. About standing up for yourself, but also about the consequences of taking revenge. About the corruption that can happen in small organizations with little oversight. About the importance of documentation and knowing your rights. One warm evening in May, Tom and Linda invited me over for dinner. We sat on their back deck, enjoying the first pleasant weather after months of brutal cold. "You know," Tom said, "when you first moved in, I thought you were just a quiet contractor who kept to himself. Turns out you took down a corrupt HOA president and exposed a major embezzlement scheme." "I just wanted to heat my garage," I replied, and we all laughed. Linda raised her glass. "To boring HOAs that don't bother anyone." "I'll drink to that," I said. The sun set over Billings, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The mountains in the distance stood sharp against the horizon. It was beautiful and peaceful, and everything I'd wanted when I moved to Pleasant Meadows. Brenda's trial had concluded a week earlier. The local paper reported she'd been sentenced according to the plea deal. 5 years, minimum 2 before parole eligibility. The HOA had recovered about half the stolen money from seized assets, with the rest to come from future garnished wages once Brenda was released. I didn't take pleasure in her incarceration, but I couldn't deny a sense of justice. She'd used her position to harass residents and steal money. The consequences were appropriate. The new HOA board was the opposite of Brenda's regime. They handled actual problems, like arranging for snow removal and maintaining common areas, without inventing petty violations. Tom ran meetings efficiently and transparently. Financial reports were posted online monthly. It was boring and functional, exactly what an HOA should be. My business thrived that spring and summer. Word had spread about my restoration work, and I had more contracts than I could handle. The workshop, with its reliable heat and comfortable workspace, made it possible to work year-round on projects. I hired an assistant, a young carpenter named Miguel who was eager to learn the trade. Pleasant Meadows Clubhouse opened in August, 5 months later than originally planned but completed properly. It was smaller than Brenda's grandiose vision, but it was nice. The neighborhood threw a party to celebrate. Kids splashed in the new pool while adults grilled burgers and caught up on gossip. "Remember when Brenda said this would be ready by April?" someone joked. "Remember when we thought she was competent?" someone else added, and everyone laughed. I stood at the edge of the party, watching neighbors interact and enjoying the warm summer evening. Sharon, the former board vice president who'd enabled Brenda, approached me with a sheepish expression. "Quentin, I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have questioned Brenda's decisions more. I should have supported you when she went after your heater. I'm sorry." "Water under the bridge," I replied. "We all get caught up following strong personalities sometimes. Still, you did the right thing exposing what she was doing. That took courage. I appreciated that." It had been a difficult decision, knowing it would result in Brenda's arrest and prosecution. But letting her continue stealing would have been worse. The following winter arrived with the same brutal cold as the previous year. My diesel heater worked perfectly, keeping the workshop warm while I completed projects. No HOA complaints, no drama, no problems. It was exactly as it should have been from the beginning. I drove past the construction site one December morning, now just an empty lot since the equipment had long since been moved out. The memory of that cold night when I'd flipped the breaker felt distant and somewhat surreal. I'd made a mistake driven by anger and frustration. I'd owned up to it and made restitution. That was the best anyone could do. Greg Thornton from Riverside Builders actually sent me a Christmas card that year. "Thanks for your honesty and integrity," it read. "Those qualities are rare. If you ever need construction work, call us first." I sent one back thanking him for his understanding. Tom stopped by the workshop one afternoon in January, watching me work on refinishing an antique door from a historic Billings building. "You know, I've been thinking about the whole Brenda situation," Tom said. "What if you hadn't requested those financial records? She'd probably still be stealing." "Someone would have caught her eventually," I replied, sanding a stubborn section of old varnish. "Maybe. Or maybe she'd have kept going for years. HOA boards operate with very little oversight. Most people don't pay attention until something goes really wrong." He was right. HOAs across America operated with minimal transparency, managing millions of dollars with volunteer boards that often had no financial training. The potential for abuse was enormous. "Makes you wonder how many other HOAs have similar problems," I said. "Probably more than we'd like to think." That conversation stuck with me. I started reading about HOA corruption cases across the country. They were surprisingly common. Presidents and board members embezzling funds, awarding contracts to relatives, taking kickbacks from vendors. Most cases only came to light when someone got suspicious enough to dig into the finances. I wrote an article about my experience and submitted it to a Montana property owners magazine. They published it under the title HOA Accountability, a Cautionary Tale. The article detailed the signs of HOA corruption, how to request financial records, and what steps to take if you suspected embezzlement. It resonated with readers. The magazine received dozens of letters from people sharing their own HOA horror stories. A state legislator, Representative Karen Thompson, even reached out. "Your article highlighted a real problem," she said during our phone call. "I'm working on legislation to increase HOA transparency requirements in Montana. Would you be willing to testify in support?" I agreed. The following March, I found myself at the Montana State Capitol in Helena, testifying before a legislative committee about HOA accountability. I told my story, emphasizing how easy it had been for Brenda to embezzle funds and how difficult it had been to uncover it. The legislation passed. Starting in 2026, Montana HOAs would be required to have annual independent audits if they managed more than $50,000 annually. Financial records would have to be posted online for member access. Board members would have mandatory training on fiduciary responsibilities. It wasn't a complete fix, but it was progress. Other homeowners would have an easier time spotting corruption before it spiraled out of control. Pleasant Meadows continued its quiet existence. The clubhouse got regular use. Snow removal happened on schedule. The neighborhood looked nice without being obsessively manicured. It was what I'd hoped for when I moved in. My business expanded to include teaching workshops on restoration techniques. Every Saturday, a group of hobbyists and aspiring contractors would gather in my garage, learning about wood refinishing, antique hardware repair, and period-appropriate restoration methods. The diesel heater kept everyone comfortable while they worked. Nobody ever complained about emissions again. Miguel, my assistant, became a full employee. His skills developed rapidly, and he handled many of the simpler restoration projects independently. We had enough work to stay busy year-round, and I was able to be selective about which projects to take on. Life was good, stable, peaceful. Everything the chaos with Brenda hadn't been. I ran into Sharon at the grocery store one afternoon in late spring. She looked hesitant when she saw me, probably still embarrassed about her role in Brenda's regime. "How are you doing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Better. I joined the Budget Oversight Committee for the new board, figured I should help make sure we never have another Brenda situation." "That's great. How's it going?" "Boring, mostly, which I guess is the point. Everything adds up, no suspicious expenses, no drama. Sounds perfect." We chatted for a few more minutes about neighborhood news before parting ways. It was nice to see people learning from the experience rather than just trying to forget it. Brenda became eligible for parole in early 2027. The parole board denied her request. She'd need to serve at least another 6 months before applying again. Linda showed me the notification that the HOA received as they had victim status in her case. "You think she'll come back here when she gets out?" Linda asked. "I doubt it. There's nothing for her here anymore. Everyone knows what she did." "Good. I know we're supposed to believe in rehabilitation, but I'm not ready to see her at HOA meetings again." I understood that sentiment. Brenda had betrayed the trust of the entire community. Even after serving time, rebuilding that trust would be nearly impossible. My workshop projects continued through 2027. I restored a staircase for the historic Moss Mansion in Billings. I refinished all the doors and windows for a Victorian house being converted into a museum. I taught dozens of students the art of proper restoration. My life had purpose and direction. The anniversary of flipping that circuit breaker came and went without much thought. It felt like ancient history now, a mistake from a different life. I'd learned from it, made amends, and moved forward. That's all anyone could do. Pleasant Meadows held its annual meeting in December 2027. Tom Chen was re-elected HOA president unanimously. The financial report showed the association was operating well within budget. The clubhouse was generating revenue from rental events. Property values in the neighborhood had increased. "We're boring and functional," Tom announced to laughter and applause, just like an HOA should be. After the meeting, several people thanked me for exposing Brenda's corruption. It still felt strange being treated as a neighborhood hero for essentially reporting theft, but I accepted the thanks gracefully. Winter returned with its familiar bite. I fired up the diesel heater on the first freezing morning, listening to its reliable hum as warm air filled the workshop. Miguel arrived at 8, stomping snow off his boots. "Ready for that cabinet restoration?" he asked. "Always." We worked through the morning, the workshop warm and comfortable despite the negative temperatures outside. The radio played classic rock softly in the background. Wood shavings accumulated on the floor. It was meditative, satisfying work. At lunch, I sat in my kitchen looking out at the snow-covered neighborhood. 2 years ago, I'd been at war with the HOA over this heater. Now I was teaching workshops, testifying at the state legislature, and running a successful business. Life had a funny way of working out. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find Officer Patterson, now Sergeant Patterson according to his uniform. "Quentin, got a minute?" My stomach clenched instinctively, though I had no reason to worry. "Sure, come in." We sat in the living room. Patterson looked relaxed, not here on official business. "I wanted to follow up on something," he began. "The construction equipment case from January 2025. It's officially being closed as unsolved." I kept my expression neutral. "Okay. The thing is, I always suspected you were involved. The timing, the motive, everything pointed to you. But we had no evidence, and honestly, what happened with Brenda Vaughn made the whole situation more complicated." "I don't know what to say." Patterson smiled slightly. "You don't have to say anything. The case is closed. But if you had been involved, which I'm not saying you were, I just want to mention that I understand how HOA harassment can push people to make bad decisions. And I'd hope that person learned from the experience." "I think anyone in that situation would learn a lot," I replied carefully. "Good. That's what I thought. Anyway, I'm heading out of town for the holidays. Wanted to tie up loose ends." We shook hands and he left. I stood in the doorway, watching his patrol car pull away. That was probably as close to absolution as I'd get for the circuit breaker incident. Patterson knew, or at least strongly suspected, but he was letting it go. I could live with that. Christmas came and went. The neighborhood looked beautiful under snow, lights twinkling on houses in the dark evenings. Tom and Linda hosted a holiday party where neighbors exchanged cookies and stories. Someone brought up the Brenda situation, inevitably. "Can you believe it's been almost 3 years?" someone said. "Best thing that ever happened to this HOA was her getting arrested," someone else added. I stayed quiet, sipping hot chocolate and listening. The story had taken on mythic proportions in the neighborhood's memory. Brenda was the villain. I was the hero who exposed her, and justice had been served. The reality was messier, but people preferred simple narratives. The new year arrived with fresh snow and cold temperatures. Business inquiries poured in for spring and summer projects. Miguel and I planned our schedule, booking jobs months in advance. The workshop remained the heart of the operation, warm and functional thanks to the diesel heater that had started everything. One February morning, I received a letter. No return address, postmarked from Montana Women's Prison. I opened it carefully. "Mr. Irving," it began in neat handwriting. "You don't know me, but I'm Brenda Vaughn's cellmate. She asked me to write this because she's not allowed to contact you directly. She wants you to know she's sorry for how she treated you. She says the HOA power went to her head and she made a lot of bad decisions. She's working on herself in here and hopes to make amends when she gets out. She understands if you can't forgive her, but she wanted you to know." The letter continued with more details about Brenda's prison programs and rehabilitation efforts. I read it twice, trying to process my feelings. Did I forgive Brenda? That was complicated. She'd harassed me over nothing, cost me money, and turned neighbors against me, but she'd also paid a heavy price. Prison, public humiliation, loss of reputation and assets. Maybe that was enough. I wrote a brief response, also sent via the cellmate since I couldn't contact Brenda directly. "Tell Brenda I appreciate the apology. I hope she's able to rebuild her life after release. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." I never heard back, and that was fine. The gesture of apology had been enough. Spring 2028 arrived early, with warmth returning in late March. The neighborhood came alive with people doing yard work, kids riding bikes, and general activity. Pleasant Meadows felt like a real community again, not a place divided by HOA drama and accusations. Tom announced he wouldn't run for HOA president again. He'd served 3 years and wanted to step back. Janet, the former secretary who'd voted against the special assessment, ran unopposed and won. "Same boring approach," Janet promised in her acceptance speech. "No drama, no nonsense, just basic management." The clubhouse hosted its first wedding that summer, a young couple from the neighborhood who met at the pool. It was a beautiful ceremony, and the rental fee went straight into the HOA reserves. Everything was transparent, documented, and appropriate. My business celebrated its 5-year anniversary in Pleasant Meadows. I'd established a reputation as one of the best restoration contractors in Montana. Projects came from across the state. Miguel had become a master craftsman in his own right. We'd hired 2 more assistants to handle the workload. The workshop had served as the foundation for all of it. That one room, heated by a diesel unit, where I'd learned to fight for my rights, and then learned about the consequences of revenge and the importance of accountability. Life came full circle in unexpected ways. One autumn afternoon, I drove past the old construction site, now a beautiful clubhouse with mature landscaping and full parking. Hard to believe the drama that location had caused. The frozen equipment, the special assessment, the investigation that brought down Brenda. All of it felt distant now, like something that happened to someone else, but the lessons remained. Stand up for yourself, but do it the right way. Document everything. Know your rights. Hold people accountable through proper channels. And when you make mistakes, own them and make amends. The Montana legislature expanded the HOA accountability laws in 2028, requiring even more transparency and oversight. Representative Thompson credited my testimony as inspiration for the continued reforms. Other states began looking at Montana's laws as models for their own legislation. Small actions could have big impacts. Fighting back against one corrupt HOA president had contributed to systemic change across the state. Pleasant Meadows thrived under Janet's leadership. Property values continued rising. Families moved in, attracted by the well-managed community and reasonable HOA fees. The neighborhood became what it was always supposed to be, a nice place to live without unnecessary drama. My diesel heater continued its reliable service. winter after winter. Every time I turned it on, I remembered the absurd fight with Brenda over emissions. It seemed ridiculous now that something so minor had escalated so dramatically. But that was the nature of HOA conflicts. Small disputes could spiral into major battles when ego and power got involved. The key was having systems in place to prevent abuse and hold people accountable. Miguel took over more of the business operations, allowing me to focus on the most complex restoration projects and teaching. We trained over 200 students through the Saturday workshops. Some had launched their own businesses. Others used the skills for personal projects. All of them learned the value of proper craftsmanship and respect for historic buildings. The workshop remained the center of everything, warm in winter, cool in summer, always productive. Brenda was released from prison in early 2029, having served her full sentence with no early parole. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd moved to Wyoming, starting over somewhere no one knew her story. I hoped she succeeded. Prison was supposed to rehabilitate, not just punish. She'd paid her debt. Life continued its steady rhythm in Pleasant Meadows. Seasons changed, neighbors came and went, children grew up. The HOA functioned smoothly under Janet and then under her successor. The clubhouse hosted events and activities. Everything worked exactly as it should. On the 5th anniversary of the circuit breaker incident, I took a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. The harassment over the heater, my impulsive revenge, the guilt and consequences, the discovery of embezzlement, Brenda's arrest and imprisonment, the legislative reforms, the growth of my business. One small action had set off a chain of events that changed many lives, mine included. I'd learned more than I ever wanted to know about HOA governance, financial fraud, and the justice system. But mostly, I'd learned about myself, about standing up for what's right, about owning mistakes, about the importance of accountability and transparency. The diesel heater hummed quietly in the background, doing its job without complaint or drama. Sometimes the simplest things worked best. Pleasant Meadows remained my home, a place I'd fought for in my own complicated way. The neighborhood wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The workshop was my sanctuary. The business was my livelihood. The community, despite everything, had become my extended family. All because I'd refused to give up my right to heat a garage the way I chose. And really, wasn't that what America was supposed to be about? Standing up for your rights, holding the powerful accountable, and building something meaningful from the chaos. The sun set over Billings, Montana, another day complete. Tomorrow I'd wake up, fire up the diesel heater, and get to work on another restoration project. Miguel would arrive right on time. Students would come for their Saturday workshop. Life would continue in its productive, peaceful rhythm. No HOA drama, no corruption investigations, no frozen construction equipment, just honest work in a warm workshop, exactly as it should be.